You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise in Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and stick with me as I tell you about a shooting at a fall event last year that took a life of a young man. Now, this story is tragic, but a recent update has made the story even worse for a small community in Indiana. Now, in small-town America, the Harvest Homecoming Festival has drawn thousands to New Albany, Indiana since 1967. New Albany is right on the border between Indiana and Kentucky. The Sherman-Minton Bridge connects Louisville, Kentucky to New Albany, Indiana, spanning the Ohio River. So I want you to think County Fair meets October Festival. There's a parade and a royalty competition. There's various events where the community members can show off their skills in local work. There's, all the fair food and, of course, the carnival rides. On the night of October 12th of last year, Bryce Gerlock and some friends were at the Harvest Homecoming Festival, and they were kind of hanging out near the carnival rides. It was the third night of the festival, and at about 10 in the evening, a fight broke out between two groups of people. These groups were young men. They were their late teens or early 20s, and the groups had some beef before that night. And it seems the groups might have even had beef outside of the festival before it spilled over inside the festival. Now, the aggressive argument turned violent when one man handed his backpack off to another while holding a gun in his free hand. It was reported that one of the group members said, "You want to have a bang out?" And apparently that's referencing a shootout between the groups. As 6 shots were fired, 18-year-old Bryce Gerlock was near the disturbance. He had spread himself in front of others, shielding his friends and other attendees from the bullets. Bryce was shot in the chest, and he died at the Harvest Homecoming Festival. 2 others in the crowd were injured, a 22-year-old man and a 44-year-old woman. Both of them had been hit in the legs by the bullets, and both recovered from their injuries in a local hospital. Now, the arguing men scattered, and they fled to a parking area, climbing in cars and evading the authorities. Over the next 2 weeks, as the investigators worked to find those who had fired the weapons, the community mourned the loss of Bryce. At the next football game, the community all wore blue in honor of Bryce, even though that wasn't the school color. Bryce was announced as a starter at the game to honor his memory. Several gatherings were held for students to mourn and remember Bryce. The athlete was so loved and revered by his peers that a neighboring high school held a special breakfast for students from Corydon High School, that's Bryce's school, and they did that just to show, solidarity for the loss they were jointly mourning. Therapists with therapy dogs volunteered their time to help the students in the community, and Bryce's dad, Scott, met with the football players at one of the first practices after the shooting and told the players that Bryce would want them to have fun and to continue to love the game. Now, the shooters were caught and arrested, but we'll get to that in a minute because tragedy also opens up the door for exploitation, whether it's intended or not. And that's what happened with Amber Tower of Towers Tees. Amber sells branded t-shirts, and in the wake of the tragedy and the call for justice, Amber offered to collect donations for the Bryce Gerlock Memorial Scholarship Fund. She advertised for the fund. She branded t-shirts and bracelets with the phrase "Justice for Bryce." The fund was being run through a local bank, so it was all on the up and up, hopefully growing in size as more shirts and bracelets were sold by Amber, and of course growing in size by other businesses donating too. But as the months ticked by, Amber didn't make any deposits into the bank account despite advertising and selling the merchandise with the concept that she would be donating the money. In early March, investigators started looking into the commitment by Amber when they were alerted by the person overseeing the scholarship fund that no deposits had been made by Amber. The investigation led authorities to believe that Amber owed the scholarship fund nearly $14,000. When she was confronted with the investigation, Amber said she intended to donate the money. She just hadn't gotten around to it yet. She said mostly because she wasn't sure how she was going to figure out exactly how much was owed. She allegedly told investigators that some shirts were sold through her storefront location, and she didn't really have a way to track that. And also, she hadn't set up a way to track the bracelet donations. She also allegedly contended that the bracelet money was picked up by someone else. Amber was arrested and charged with criminal conversion. She has not been found guilty of these charges, so everything is alleged at this point. I looked up the penalties for criminal conversion in Indiana, and it seems that Amber would fall under the possibility of up to 1 year in jail and a monetary fine. That is, if she's found guilty. Now, I think the part that can't be fixed here is the additional pain added to an already unnecessary tragedy because of a bunch of underdeveloped brains deciding to settle their street dispute with 6 bullets. So, what about those men who were arrested and charged with various crimes that occurred that night of the shooting? 5 individuals were eventually arrested. 20-year-old Joshua Smith took a plea deal and is serving 8 years in prison. 23-year-old Shermichael Smith is facing charges of murder, attempted murder, battery, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. 24-year-old Darius Tuff has the same charges as Shermichael. 18-year-old Isaiah Page is facing attempted murder charges. An 18-year-old Demarius Person has been charged with murder and aiding and abetting. Now, Bryce's obituary mentions his athletic ability on both the soccer and football fields, and before his death, Bryce won the IHSAA Sportsmanship Award. Totally on brand for this kid, right? The guy who died trying to save others was the most upstanding on the football field. Bryce was best friends with his brother Owen, and the two could be found driving around the small city in their truck that they called Big Blue. Bryce's older sister had played sports in college, and Bryce hoped to do the same on the football field. He had even received attention from a couple of Division I schools, Middle Tennessee State and Marshall University. And completely as a side note to this story, when I research the victims, I try to learn about them as people, which of course begins with their obituary and their social media presence. And Bryce's obituary was provided by the Gelbach and Royce Funeral Home, and it is top-notch. What a beautiful tribute that this specific funeral home created online. When businesses do it right, I think we should applaud them. Well done, Gelbach and Royce. I hope the community can continue to heal from this unnecessary instance. And now to a response by a Mississippi man found not guilty on capital murder charges. This case all started back on January 3rd of 2020 when a beloved volunteer coach in the Hattiesburg area was gunned down inside his home. When first responders arrived, 44-year-old Coach Tarvin was found dead in his home, having been shot once in the chest and once in the lower back. Gunshot wounds to 2 different sides of the body kind of makes you believe that there was obviously a struggle that had ensued. Coach J's home was ransacked with personal belongings scattered everywhere. The killers had left a mess that included evidence, items they had brought with them and didn't take back, like a crowbar and a mask and a loaded magazine for a 9mm handgun. Investigators also found about $1,000 in cash and a container filled with marijuana, which in the state of Mississippi is still illegal. And I know for most people that means nothing. They go ahead and use it anyway, but the law is the law and we need to make sure we understand it from state to state. Now, as the community mourned the loss of this giver, a volunteer who reached out with his time to make the area better, investigators came up pretty much empty-handed for a while. Now, it was right before COVID, and we clearly learned that the pandemic altered investigations and trials. It kind of put a halt to things. But whatever it was, it took 4 years before 3 men were arrested for the death of Coach J. 25-year-old Cody McNair and 26-year-old Eddie Person were both arrested and charged with capital murder. The enhanced charge was due to the murder happening during the commission of a robbery. Now, Cody's dad, 44-year-old Eddie McNair, was also charged, except only with obstruction of justice. Now, the source material on this case is very limited, but I'm guessing authorities believed Eddie McNair had hid details or evidence from detectives. Now, when it all came down to the trials, Cody was the first to face a jury. And the quick trial, just 2 days, didn't go well for him. He was found guilty of murder and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The state indicated they believed that Cody was the one who shot Coach J. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood showed a truck connected to Cody leaving the scene. Well, last week, Eddie Person faced his capital murder trial. It was a different jury and a different approach, and it left Eddie with a not guilty verdict. Now, being vindicated wasn't enough for Eddie. Video of his verdict reading was live streamed, and let me just kind of set it up for you. The whole verdict took about 4 minutes. This included the judge warning the gallery to be calm. He told those in attendance that he didn't want any outbursts, and if they couldn't handle their emotions, they should leave now before the reading. After all of that was accomplished, the verdict for Eddie was read, and like I said, it was not guilty. Some members of the gallery did not heed the judge's warning. They reacted loudly, and they were escorted out. Then, as the judge was reading all the legal hoo-ha, Eddie, who was sitting next to his lawyer, turns to the camera and double barrel flips off the video feed. Now, if you're listening on podcast, you have to give this video a watch. For you on YouTube, I'll play it right now. For everyone else, I'll have my daughter Marley post it on Instagram so you can go there and find it.
So Cody McNair, the other defendant in this case, was found guilty and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole on the same evidence that was presented in this case, essentially.
Now, of course, all of this is controversial because of the double barrel flip-off. But his attorney all but smacks him upside the head for his behavior. Now, the attorney is professional, don't get me wrong, but he gives Eddie a talking to. Well, as you can imagine, the video has gone viral with thousands and thousands of comments. Several comments referenced the lawyer and the talking to that he gave Eddie. One man commented that the attorney was a good lawyer, that no matter the money, a lawyer should always tell you when you're wrong. Then another man commented saying, the attorney be like, man, you gonna mess this up. And then another commenter said, I see how it is. Acting like that, we'll see him back in a courtroom one day. And I guess we will see if Eddie Person makes another appearance on Rise in Crime in the future. Let me know, should Eddie have thrown up the obscene gesture? Now, the question isn't can he? The question is, of course he can, but should he? Let me know. Now to Harvard and their medical program, because the former manager of the medical school morgue is at the center of a disturbing case involving the theft and sale of human remains. 57-year-old Cedric Lodge from Goffstown, New Hampshire, was a valued employee who managed the anatomical gift program at Harvard Medical School. And it wasn't just for a little while. Cedric has worked in the Harvard morgue since 1995. Unfortunately, he was terminated in May of 2023. See, Cedric was managing a program that accepted donated cadavers that should have been used for educational and research purposes. Cedric had full reign with the cadavers because of his job. And the expectation was that once medical students had used the cadavers for their intended educational purposes, the bodies would then be either respectfully cremated or respectfully returned to the families. Now, the plan was always outlined per the family's wishes when the body was donated to science. Cedric went along with the plan for 2 decades, doing his job the way it should have been done. But in 2018, Cedric strayed with the help of his wife, Denise. Cedric started removing parts from the cadavers, like maybe the skin or the brain or other organs. He would then take the body parts home to New Hampshire, where he and his wife would market the parts online and sell them. So what do body parts fetch online? Well, Cedric's wife was paid via PayPal by one man nearly $38,000 over 3 years. The court indictment says those payments from PayPal had memos attached that said things like head number 7. And then another memo read brains with 6 I's in the spelling of brains. Now, the indictment also says that Denise had a buyer out of Massachusetts that was purchasing skin from Cedric and Denise that she allegedly knew that buyer was tanning, like leather. Like Silence of the Lambs horror. Now, Cedric and Denise got so bold with their side scheme that the same woman who was buying skin Well, she allegedly met Cedric in the morgue on campus to see 2 dissected faces that she wanted to purchase. Well, eventually, Cedric and Denise got caught, and they, along with 2 others, were indicted by a grand jury last year. So that left me asking, what do you charge someone with when it comes to these kind of crimes? The answer? Interstate transport of stolen human remains. It's a federal crime. Remember, Harvard is in Massachusetts, and Cedric took the remains to New Hampshire and then shipped them to other states. Now, federal prosecutors also linked Cedric and Denise to a mortuary in Arkansas that was doing the same kind of business. Well, last Wednesday, Cedric pled guilty in Pennsylvania. He faces up to 10 years in prison when he is sentenced later this year. And Denise, who is 64 years old, well, she took a plea deal earlier this year as well. She will also be sentenced later this year. And that mortuary out of Arkansas, well, they were supplying faces to create killer clown-style dolls that people could purchase online. Now, I don't even want to know what people do behind closed doors when I start researching these cases. What does one do with a killer clown face doll? I don't know. So the National Funeral Directors Association, they've done a study on this topic, and they say that human heads can be sold for $3,000 online. That's a typical price. And a spine can go for $1,200. And a set of hands can fetch about $1,000. And an entire body would average about $11,000. And some of this business is totally legit. Funeral homes can legitimately sell to like a cosmetic surgery firm or to research facilities. The thing is, you can't lie about it like Cedric and Denise did. Okay, locally, 4 years ago, we had a funeral director in East Idaho get busted for corpses just rotting on tables in his mortuary. A neighboring apartment complex reported the rotting bodies and the smell to authorities because they could obviously smell it, and also because they could see through a mortuary window that a body was just sitting on a table for days. When all of that happened, I looked into funeral homes, and one of the issues is that state to state, the laws vary widely. It seems states crack down after a funeral home controversy. Before that, they don't seem to really have a reason to address the issues. One of the challenges is funeral homes in smaller states might not have the resources to inspect those funeral homes regularly. And if the funeral homes aren't watched, you might end up with the situation where Cedric and Denise were able to take advantage of the weaknesses in oversight. What I have learned is ask lots of questions. It's hard to ask those questions in a time of grief, but that is the best way to not be taken advantage of in a difficult loss period. Let me know what you think of this story. It seems like everyone has a story in their state that kind of matches with this crime. And finally today, I'm bringing you a case suggestion from Blount County. One of my loyal listeners sent this one in. And this is out of Tennessee. And digging deep into this one was kind of a struggle because this always happens. Okay, let me explain. Digging deep into a case when there's a plea deal means that a lot of things aren't revealed to the public. So that's the issue here. It's not like there wasn't a lot of stuff online. It's just the details are a little muddled. But one thing is evident. The community is outraged, and they believe that a pattern of cover-up of corruption was once again highlighted in the sentencing of a Blount County teacher earlier this month. Okay, here's all that I could find. Blount County is in eastern Tennessee and is nestled at the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains. It's a little bit of urban and a little bit of rural, but it's not huge. We're talking about a population of under 40,000 served by the Blount County School District. The area is about 30 minutes from Knoxville and 170 miles from Nashville. Now, I'm trying to give you a picture of the area because it seems like this is a place where your family name, generationally, might provide you some ease in life. Well, up until 2007, the director of the Marysville City Schools was Dr. Mike Dalton. He was a heralded man in education, and even though he retired after many years in the school system in 2007, many believe his influence is still prominent. Now, Joe Dalton is Mike Dalton's son, and he has worked in the school system in Blount County since 2001. He first started as a teacher's assistant at William Blount High School, but by 2005, 2 years before his dad retired, Joe began as a full-time teacher. Joe is a physical education instructor, and in recent years, he was fulfilling a role as a roving PE teacher. So on, like, say, Tuesdays, he's at school A, then on Wednesdays, he's at school B, and so forth. It just rotates. Well, back in January of last year, Joe was arrested after multiple people complained about his behavior. 6 of those specific complaints were eventually addressed, and according to the community, the investigation was very delayed. But here's what I could find. Several Blount County schools have cameras in the classroom areas, and those areas include the gymnasiums where Joe would conduct his PE class. When extensive review was conducted using the camera footage, it was determined by investigators that there were, quote, multiple concerning incidents where Joe had physical contact with students that was deemed inappropriate. Okay, what was that contact? Well, they said they were things like Joe allegedly having a child stand between his legs while he swayed back and forth with them. He would also hug them or tickle them. Lots of physical contact between him and a bunch of elementary-aged kids. And some video allegedly showed kids wriggling away from Joe, kind of exhibiting distress that he was touching them. Now, under pressure from parents, Joe resigned from the school right before he was arrested in January of 2024. But I want you to remember something. Remember that case I brought you with the high school coach and the naked fat test trial? That was just over the last 2 weeks. Well, Joe's case has a lot of the same characteristics. The law can only stretch so far, and despite parents and kids expressing that the touching seemed sexual, the touching doesn't fall under the definition of a sexual crime, at least according to the Blount County DA. The touching could be determined to be aggressive, but not sexual. And so when the 44-year-old teacher took a plea deal last year, he only accepted responsibility for assault. There was no sexual component. At the beginning of this month, Joe was sentenced for his guilty plea. And that plea deal included Joe being sentenced to just 6 months of unsupervised probation. Joe was able to pretty much walk away free and maintain his teaching license in the state. The community was outraged. Facebook post after Facebook post. The outrage is highlighted in multiple news articles as well. And protests popped up in Marysville demanding that the school system reevaluate the way that it operates. Blount County Mayor Ed Mitchell got in on the outrage. He released a lengthy statement via Facebook about the debacle. He said the following: I share everyone's frustrations with the outcome of the charges against Mr. Dalton. There are not enough words to express how deeply disappointed I am. Laws need to be changed. At the root of it all, this entire situation could have been avoided years and years ago with the proper action by school administration. Well, he then went on to highlight how he believes the school board is finally stepping up. He wrote the following: there are finally members of the Blount County School Board and leadership in the central office who are fed up with this and willing to face the hard decisions and take the stance to protect our children. An incredible amount of work has already been done to eliminate these unacceptable situations and deal swiftly with any school staff who aren't working with the best interest of the children. Now, he's referencing the fact that late last year, county leaders ordered an investigation into Joe's employment and also into systemic issues in the school district as complaints piled up about Joe, and they weren't addressed. Now, I should tell you, in the various Facebook posts referencing the mayor's response, people are pretty much calling BS. Some are claiming the mayor is part of the cover-up and that he's now just kind of trying to save his own rear end. And several other, quote, cases are vaguely mentioned in all of the Facebook brouhaha. Nothing's been filed, but people seem to believe there's more situations like Joe's that are, going on in the school district. Now, if you give those posts credibility, it seems like Joe isn't the only teacher that's tenured and being protected. I would love to hear from locals to Tennessee about this case and others. I would also love to start a conversation with you guys about cameras in public schools. Should there be a camera in every classroom? And doesn't that protect the good teachers as much as outing the not so good teachers? And obviously, outing the misbehavior of students? I want to know what you think. Also, another question. Should Joe's teaching license be revoked? Weigh in on all of that. All right, that's your Monday episode of Rise and Crime. It's a shared experience. I love when people give me suggestions and I can dive into them, because things like what's happening in Blount County, that's not being widely reported. So keep sending me those suggestions. And thank you for being here. Please share an episode with a friend so that more people can find out about Rise and Crime. We love 5-star reviews and comments here at Oh No Media, and also likes and follows and subscribes on all of our channels, our podcasts, everything we've got going. Remember, the 3 Oh No Media broadcasts are Into the Dark, Murder with My Husband, and Rise and Crime. Join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.